Hey, so good morning, friends and fellow naturalists, to what actually might be the season finale of the first season of the Extraordinary Wildlife series. Because I'm probably going to be off again next week. I know I'm off all the time camping, but it's kind of, we're getting towards the end of the summer camping season, and we might not have a guest speaker next week. So this may be and we're kind of starting a reboot in September with I guess we call season 2. And so what I suggest you, I mean, whatever you want to do next Friday, but maybe one thing I'll suggest is that at 9 a.m. wherever you are, maybe grab your coffee or tea and just go into what you consider your backyard, and let that be your season finale, because your backyard wildlife produces way better a show than anything I do online and often inside, except for some of you. So maybe, there's something you learned from either our time together on Fridays or things you've learned in other parts of your life, that as you kind of sit and think about your backyard habitat, your backyard ecosystem, your community interactions, maybe there's an individual species you notice, or animals or plants or relationships between species or some other processes or observations. So just maybe a little time to reflect on what your backyard ecosystem is, and maybe questions will come up, thoughts will come up. I wonder about something. I'd love to hear those. Maybe you'll just want to lie down or take your shoes off to feel the grass beneath your feet, because providing cool comfort is something I think grass does really well. But before we talk more about grass, I have another, I guess, mandatory assignment, because we're all going to do it together right now. The latest addition to the UEC in My Backyard website is a new series that comes from our trivia master and the coordinator of UEC in My Backyard, Danny Pirtle, who incidentally also produces on and off, when they have time, a very fun podcast called Encyclopedia. You can find it in all the places you find podcasts. They have some really cool episodes. One of my favorites is on maple syrup. But Danny's latest edition is a new segment called 5 Facts with Danny. This video is a little bit longer than the ones I usually share here, but it's worth it, and it's still pretty short, and you'll see why. So let's listen to this together.
Hi, welcome to 5 Facts with Danny. That's me, I'm Danny. And tonight I am out in my backyard on a beautiful August evening, and I'm hoping to see some moths. Now there are 12,000 different species of moths that live in North America, and as with all things, no matter where you live, there are some that are more common and some that are less common. And one of those less common species is called the darling underwing. I've been reading up on the darling underwing, and I'm really excited about the possibility of maybe seeing one, although acknowledging that they are pretty rare. So while I'm out here waiting for the moths to come out, I have for you 5 facts about the darling underwing. Here we go. Fact number 1. The scientific name for the darling underwing moth is Catocala cara. Now, a scientific name, this is the genus and the species. This is something that every species on the entire planet has. They have a genus and a species. And this scientific name gives us our first clue to what the darling underwing looks like. So let's get nerdy for a second. The species name cara is Latin for darling. Now that makes sense, since the darling underwing has the word darling literally in its name. Now the genus name here, it comes from 2 different Greek words, so we're going to split this down the middle here. Kato is the Greek word for under or behind, and kala is the Greek word for beauty. So under, there is beauty on this darling moth. Okay, but under what there is beauty? Well, as you might have surmised, it's under the wing, which brings us to fact number 2. The darling underwing exhibits something called flash coloration. Now what this means is that when it's at rest, the darling underwing looks pretty bland and and unremarkable. So the darling underwing specifically has brown and black, and it kind of looks like the bark of a tree. However, as soon as it takes off, as soon as it flies, we are treated to a beautiful flash of bright colors. This is a trait in all underwings. They all have these bright colors underneath their wings. On the darling underwing specifically, their underwing has bright red scarlet stripes. Fact number 3, the way the darling underwing protects itself from predators is with another technique, which also has the word coloration in it, deflective coloration. So, as we mentioned, when it's at rest, the darling underwing kind of looks like the bark of a tree, and lo and behold, most of the time they're resting up against a tree, and so that works really well as camouflage. However, if that camouflage isn't working and a predator is still getting closer and closer, then the darling underwing is going to take off, and that bright flash of color on its underwing is going to distract the predator, hopefully anyways, if this deflective coloration works. So that bright color is what that predator is going to go for, because it's going to be the easiest thing for it to see, the easiest thing for it to spot or grab. And if, unfortunately, the predator does get a hold of that bright underwing, the moth is still going to be okay because there's no vital organs under there. It can lose its underwing and still survive. Fact number 4. Entomologists seem to like a good theme. So the first underwings were described by Carl Linnaeus, the famous taxonomist who named so many of the species that we're familiar with today. And ever since, they've always followed this theme. The theme you might notice from some of these names, we've got the betrothed underwing, the little wife underwing, the girlfriend underwing, the widow underwing. They all have to do with women and marriage, or some combination thereof. Now, there are a lot of underwings, so once they started to run out of some of these more obvious adjectives for underwings, they started to use some words that, you know, you could say maybe describe a woman on her wedding day. For example, graceful, the charming underwing, and then of course that's how we landed today with the darling underwing. And finally, fact number 5. There are a lot of different ways to see and attract moths to your backyard, but if you're looking for underwings, your best bet is to create a sugary bait. Now, I didn't have any fermented fruit lying around, but I did have fermented something else. That's kind of the fun part about being a naturalist, is that you always get to experiment and try new things. So we'll see what happens. I took some of the beer from the back of my fridge, mixed it in with some brown sugar, stirred it all together, and used a brush to paint it all over the fence in my backyard. If you've got a fence, this is great. Moths like to land on surfaces like fences. If you have trees, even better. And best, if you're looking for darling underwings, are poplars and willows. If you have those, cover that tree with some of your bait, and who knows, you could be in business to see some underwings. So now, I just wait and see if the moths are going to come visit me tonight. As for me, lots of moths here tonight, but no underwings so far, which just means I gotta keep on the lookout. If you happen to see any cool moths, and especially if you happen to spot a darling underwing, be sure to let us know at the Urban Ecology Center. And we'll see you for the next one. Happy mothing!
All right. And if you joined us last night, I hope you enjoyed the Nocturnal Yardversity Blitz. If you weren't able to join us, you missed a fantastic gathering of backyard moth parties and a general celebration of the night shift of organisms that kind of take over when the birds and the butterflies clock out. Several folks put up sheets in their backyard or painted their trees or fences with their wonderful concoctions of fermenting fruit or beer, as Danny mentioned. And turns out we found out one of the things we found out from our research last night, that you can see on the bottom left picture from Corey Zetz's backyard that if the moths like it, the dogs like it, as Robin also found out. So just something to think about. And if you were on YouTube Live from anywhere from 8 to 10 p.m. last night, we were talking about moths and butterflies with moth trivia, and also marveling all the great submissions and photos you guys found in your backyards last night. It was really cool. As Ethan mentioned, we'll be doing backyard blitzes every month, and the next one's September 12th with the backyard birding blitz, focus on migratory birds. So I hope you can join us. Okay, the bluegrass of Kentucky. I've mentioned before that if you had to pick maybe one of the most successful species on the planet, Kentucky bluegrass might be it. And along with some of their grass cousins, that they're everywhere. And it was brought to everywhere by one of the other most successful species on the planet, which is us. Almost everywhere we go, we bring grass and worms and trees, and then right behind us come the house sparrows and the starlings and the squirrels and coyotes. So But let's first start to talk about the plant, and then maybe a little bit about our relationship with the plant. At the highest level, grass falls into the eukaryotic domain and the plant kingdom, which for all intents and purposes means that their cells, whether we're talking single-celled or multicellular organisms, have internal structures like nuclei, and they have cell walls. So back in the day, and we're talking way back in the day, like Aristotle, if it was kind of easy, it was easy to know what was considered a plant, because it was essentially plants were everything that weren't animals. And so like Aristotle and even Linnaeus said, if it moved on its own, it was an animal essentially, and if it didn't move, it was a plant. So plants at one time included all the algae, the fungi, the archaea, the bacteria, and but then later and this is still not a clear, there's certain scientists that believe in certain classification systems, or based on evidence and other things, but the first to leave the plants were that we took away the archaea and the bacteria, and now they're in their own separate domains, and they have very simple cells without those internal structures. And then fungi were moved into their own kingdom, and so were protists, but the protists didn't leave without grabbing the red and the brown algae with them. So by most definitions today, plants are in what we call a clade viriplantae, or the green plants. So this includes angiosperms, like the flowering plant that's in the center of the screen, and the green algae that's already represented here. And it also includes cone-producing plants, or gymnosperms. It includes ferns. It includes hornworts, great names, liverworts. It includes, and mosses. And so again, to think about it today and to keep things clear, you refer to the group today as what we consider plants, as the green plants. And most of them are photosynthesizing, and because they are not using the green wavelengths in photosynthesis, they reflect that back into our eyes, which is why we see them as green. In photosynthesis, energy from the sun is converted into sugars, and those are the very sugars that fuel almost all life on the planet. The primary factories of these sugars are chloroplasts, which contain the pigment chlorophyll, and an amazingly complex relationship with cyanobacteria. It's an endosymbiotic relationship, meaning the cyanobacteria actually live inside the organelles of the plant cells. And it's this wonderfully complex system that, again, allows almost all life as we know it to thrive through the productions of sugars and atmospheric oxygen. Some plants have lost some or all of their photosynthetic ability by becoming either parasitic, like the witchweed on the left, which derives its nutrients from other plants, or mycotrophic, like that beautiful flowering Bermannia on the right, which derives its nutrients through a relationship with fungi in the mycorrhizal relationships we talked about a few weeks ago. So while these are all classified with the green plants, they aren't green because they lost the ability to photosynthesize. There are about 320,000 species of plants, most of which produce seeds, and many of which are extremely important to most wildlife, including and especially humans, as we have domesticated many species, producing thousands and thousands of varieties of fruits and grains and vegetables and flowers, and not to mention all the cultural uses, medicine, drugs, construction, ornaments, writing material. Plants are pretty important. And as we further characterize our grass, they are vascular, meaning they have xylem and phloem. They're angiosperms, or flowering plants, and they're monocots, meaning they have one cotyledon or embryonic leaf. And this groups grass with things like palms and pineapples and bananas, none of which are made of wood, but at least two of these are thought of as trees. If we skip ahead a bit, we get to the family Poaceae, which is the group we affectionately know of as grass. So from a scientific perspective, if it's a grass, it's in this family. And there are about 12,000 species of grass that have huge value to humans, a staple food in the form of maize or corn, wheat, rice, barley, sugar, millet. All in all, the grasses provide over half of all human dietary energy. And this doesn't even get into their uses as building materials and biofuel, primarily in the form of the ethanol from corn. They're used as plastics. and we like to ferment them into things like rum. So yeah, grasses are pretty important. And it's also kind of fun to get into the nitty gritty of the grass plant and look at all the parts of grass and their functions. And we'll do that primarily focusing on Poa pratensis, or Kentucky bluegrass. This was one of the original plants described by Linnaeus. Poa is Greek for fodder, aptly named for one of its primary functions for wildlife and livestock. And pratensis is Latin for meadow. So you could say outside you have a lawn made of grass, or you could say you have a lawn made of meadow fodder. That's your choice. Starting at the bottom of the plant, grass has a mat of fibrous, dense roots under the soil. Lawn grass in particular has its roots concentrated at the surface. And this property is not unlike our mighty oak tree from last week that also has its roots kind of focused on the surface. Shallow, tight roots are good at holding soil together and preventing erosion, and allows for really tight cycling of nutrients, similar to what you see in a mature rainforest, particular one that's on older, poorer soil, which is why clear cutting can be so devastating in some areas, because it can take thousands of years for those mature plant communities to redevelop after you disturb that thin layer where the plants meet the soil. But from a human lawn care perspective, this trait of the tight, shallow roots enables us to do this, to neatly roll up our grass and move it to wherever we want it to go. You may have seen this before, a comparison between your native grass roots on the right and your turf grass roots on the left. And you see that's a very different adaptation. You see, one of those, the turf grass, is an adaptation for tight cycling of nutrients, and the other is mainly for water. So water conservation is a major issue facing humanity, and one of these plants is not going to fare well in dry conditions and is going to require a lot of watering, at least if you want it to look a certain way, whereas the native grasses are able to tap into the water table even during dry spells when the water table level in the soil drops. So if you have turf grass and you want it to look a certain way, it's probably going to require a lot of mowing and watering. If you have native grasses, once they're established, you may never have to water again. So above the roots and just above the soil level is something called the crown, which is a clump of matter that gives rise to the stem of the grass plant. And the stem is called the culm, C-U-L-M, and kind of sounds like culm. And the culm is essentially what we would think of as the trunk or the main stem of the grass plant. And at various points along the culm, you have nodes, which is that bump towards the top of the screen. And that's where new culm growth starts, and is the only place along the culm that isn't hollow. So if you've ever seen a cross section of bamboo, which is a grass, that's a good example showing how the culm is hollow except at these nodes. So we have roots below ground, the crown above the ground, giving rise to this culm, and at various points producing nodes. The nodes are also the base of the leaf, and a grass plant, being a typical green plant, produces leaves for photosynthesis. And in grass, we call the leaves blades, which are flattened, and those are the parts that you can put between your thumbs to produce that nice piercing whistling sound. And it's also where we get the term blades of grass. So the leaves of grass are the blades. We're referring to the leaves of the grass as opposed to that culm. And when you look at the leaves that come off the grass plant on the upper left at various points, to me, it really starts to think of like a corn plant, and which also has the main stalk that's round, and then the flattened leaves coming off the corn stalk at various parts. So next time in your yard and you have, grass that's not cut too short, pick one up and then try to differentiate between the round stem and then those elongate flattened blades. And the lower part of the leaf is called the sheath, that wraps around the culm at a joint called the ligule. Essentially, the sheath is given a big old hug to that culm. So if you have that grass plant in your hand, you can also then try to peel back the blade, and you'll start to peel the sheath off of the culm, which to me is similar to when you're peeling the outer layer off of a green onion, because those outer layers are really wrapped around that main stem. And maybe one of the most important features of grass, which is important to herbivores like wildebeest in Africa, or important to grazing livestock, or important to any of us who maintain a lawn, is that the growth in a blade of grass happens at the base, which then allows for the continual munching of those leaves, or mowing at the top, because the older growth is pushed up towards by the new growth at the bottom. So here's a really good overall picture with the main parts labeled. And you'll see there are a couple more important parts that I haven't mentioned that don't have to do with growth of a plant, but rather with how the grass disperses or colonizes an area. So you have the stolon, which moves horizontally above the ground. And then the rhizomes are essentially the same thing, but they move below ground. And both of these are like little runners that can go and spread out and give rise to new grass plants. So your backyard grass is really a series of interconnected clones. And you've probably seen how, pulling up one section of your grass, you'll bring other plants up with you if you pull at the stolon or the rhizome, but they're so interconnected that it's a little harder. It's really evident to me, and somebody earlier mentioned creeping Charlie, which is not a grass, it's a mint. But if you pull up creeping Charlie, it's like pulling up a rope of plants, and unfortunately that's not easy to get rid of because they stick around. But grass can spread through cloning in this case, and it can also spread through sexual reproduction. If you stopped mowing your lawn or a section of your lawn, you'll eventually get a mature grass plant. Kentucky bluegrass gets to about 2 or 3 feet, and eventually it will produce flowers. And here is a Kentucky bluegrass flower. And hey, what do you notice about those flowers? Maybe the color of that flower is why it's called bluegrass, and that is indeed why it's called bluegrass. So it's these tiny, delicate blue flowers that most of us never get to see because we don't let them grow past lawn height. And I also want to show you one of my favorite native grasses that everyone should plant, the side oats grama, just because I love, I've got some of these in my front yard, and I marvel at the delicate but striking flowers that you can only see if you get down and look really closely. Most grasses don't need bees or other insects for pollination, but they do take advantage of the wind, which blows the boy parts from one plant onto the girl parts of another plant, which eventually produces the seeds that are also either blown away by the wind to produce another grass plant somewhere else, or they're eaten by wildlife, or depending on the species of grass plants, by humans in the form of wheat or rice or oats or barley or other things. Kentucky bluegrass is a cold season grass, which means it grows mainly in the spring or the fall, but has this benefit to us and our lawns of being green all year, which is a contrast to the warm season grasses like Bermuda grass, which go dormant in the winter and turn brown. And because people tend to not like having their lawn go brown for a period of months, oftentimes you'll see the grass blends on the market in areas where particularly where cold season grasses don't grow, like in the South. So you have different species or varieties that can help you keep your lawn green. And in some places you can keep it green with a lot of watering. So I don't know, there are reasons to love Kentucky bluegrass. Just seeing this picture makes me feel comfortable. I don't know, we're also speaking from Wisconsin. And so Kentucky bluegrass also has a very important function here. There's an iconic football field up in Green Bay that uses Kentucky bluegrass, and it holds up very well to the constant pounding of feet, as well as the harsh Wisconsin climate. So I keep coming back to this slide because it represents maybe the most important cultural feature of Kentucky bluegrass, which is the production of the iconic American lawn. And when you start to look at the history, the lawn really isn't an American thing. It's just something Americans have adopted well. And if you go back to a time pre-industrial revolution, the good old American lawn was really more like this. It was a bed of packed dirt from compaction of feet, and there were weeds, and often you'd have a vegetable garden in here. But this is kind of what our lawns looked like. The lawn as we know it, we think, had its roots in England as this well manicured, beautiful expanse of grass that was maintained by people that can afford it. And you had to be wealthy to have a lawn, because at that time there were no lawnmowers. So you essentially hired a team of people that went out with scythes to do this by hand, to keep this nice level of grass. Or if you paid them enough, the livestock would take care of that for you too. But if you think about it, they didn't even have hoses. So you needed a full-time team just to keep the grass irrigated, so much as, not even considering the keeping it cut, keeping it mown. Well, we Americans also wanted to be considered sophisticated, and we tried lawns, but our native grasses just weren't conducive to this concept. So we brought the British seed here to seed our lawns, and that ended up not working well, because we just have a very different climate, and the native grasses in England didn't do well here. So it took a big effort by 3 major players to finally figure out how Americans could also have a lawn. And when we're talking like a Herculean effort, we're talking like NASA level, getting somebody on the moon. And the 3 players in this effort were the United States Golf Association. I'm not making this up. This very important and official looking emblem of the United States Golf Association teamed up with the United States Department of Agriculture, whose acronym is only 1 letter off, and who also have a official looking seal, and the Garden Club of America. So these 3 powerhouses started importing and testing seeds from all around the world, experimenting until they finally found essentially 3 types of grasses that could allow Americans, wherever they live, to have this nice manicured green lawns. And the 3 species you may be familiar with are the Kentucky bluegrass, which we've been talking about, which is from Europe, Bermuda grass, which is from Africa, and my favorite to say, zoysia grass from Asia. So these are the 3 species that led to almost all of the varieties and blends that can be found today. And now finally, we Americans can produce a nice American lawn. And it was the American Garden Club in particular, especially post World War II, after this picture, but they really pressured Americans in their marketing, in public service announcements and contests, that it was our civic duty to have a lawn that was a plot with a single type of grass, with no intruding weeds, kept mown at a height of 1.5 inches, uniformly green and neatly edged. So there was a lot of social pressure to have this good old American patriotic lawn. And this slide also shows you a turning point in affordable lawn care. Instead of hiring a team of people to mow the lawn, an English person by the name of Edwin Budding produced the first zero-emission lawnmower, the Real Mower, which had gears at a 16-to-1 ratio. So the sharp wheel with the blade on it turned 16 times for every 1 time the wheel on the grass turned. And of course, we had to deal with this inconvenience of hard labor all the way until somebody invented the single-stroke gas-powered mower, which does not burn clean, is very polluting. But thankfully, I think the pendulum swings, and nowadays, while we still love our lawns, I still love the part of my lawn that's grass, particularly for picnics and playing catch. But the American lawn is evolving, whether it's through a return in popularity of the Real Mower, or now we have electric mowers, or through the use of xeriscaping in areas, particularly in the Southwest and the Southwest part of the slide. So, some of those lawns in Arizona and New Mexico can just be such a draw of water. And so thankfully people are returning to lawns that are a little more sustainable, make sense, and don't require watering. And then the one on top, the picture on top, native planting, which has taken over most of my lawn. We still have some turf grass sections, but it's given us the benefits of not having to mow or water our lawn. And again, this is just super, super beneficial for native wildlife. And now their efforts, albeit way smaller than the effort I described earlier, of researching no-mow lawns that use a combination of sedges that have the look and feel of grass without the disadvantage of all the time and effort that you put into mowing and watering them, and also have a huge benefit for wildlife. So the picture on the top is an example of one of those no-mow blends, and you can get those from places like Prairie Nursery here in Wisconsin, and they're working on it, and you know, I think pretty soon we'll get some really good grass alternatives that you can feel good about and still play on and have picnics on and all that great stuff. Kind of a final thought here: the U.S. lawn care industry is a $30 billion a year industry, and 30 billion. That's just in the United States. And for perspective, we spend only 1/2 billion on our pets. So we spend 60 times more money on our lawns as we do on our pets. And you know, again, I didn't in this talk. I really didn't get into the disadvantages of grass in terms of wildlife, but from an ecological perspective, there is very, very little value in a turf grass lawn. It does help with erosion, as I mentioned earlier, but from a wildlife perspective, I mean, you really might as well just put in plastic turf. But you know, I'm not. This isn't a judge. As I mentioned, I do have lawn in my yard. I love the grass in Washington Park, but I'm really glad that we're looking at these more sustainable options in lawn care as a society. And I look forward to adapting my lawn as well. And I almost forgot one more important piece of history, and that's bluegrass music. So bluegrass as a style goes way back, but it wasn't until the 1938 when a band was formed called Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, where this type of music was kind of you know, popularized, at least that term bluegrass, because Kentucky is the bluegrass state. And so again, the music goes way back, but the term bluegrass for this music has its origins, at least we can trace into this particular band. So thanks everyone. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.